Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and finally, as I have promised, here is the evaluation of the armor sets in Dark Souls. But before starting the evaluation, I'd like to say that of course I understand and I realize that this is a game and it's a fantasy setting. So what we're doing here, I'm not trying to debunk the game. I understand that there is fantasy and a different lore and a different world and undead and dragons and stuff behind this. So we are only evaluating the armors for the sake of knowledge and because we are interested in knowing whether these armors would have functioned in our real world, and we'll also place them as far as the century is concerned. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so we'd like to begin from one of my favourite sets, which is the set that the knight begins with, so the knight set. And I think this is a really good one because it looks very historical. It's not 100% historical, and we'll get there in a moment, but I think it looks quite good, particularly if you compare it to other games. Now, if we look at this set, at first glance, we can immediately spot that it's probably a 16th century type of armor, probably early 16th century kind of armor, and it looks rather gothic. So we're talking about the Maximilian set, and the reason for that is because it has fluting, so the kind of grooves that you see on the armor that is typical of the German style of armors. The fluting having the purpose of increasing the overall structural strength of the armor and also helping deflecting points. Now, the only complaints that I have as far as historical accuracy is concerned is that if this was actually a Gothic armor, 100% Gothic armor, then first of all I would have more sharply waisted cuirasses, whereas in this case we see that the cuirass kind of slowly decreases its waistline, whereas in an actual Gothic armor it literally follows the shape of the waist. Now, the game tells us that this is kind of a low knight armor, and the reason being that the plates are rather thin. But I don't think this as a negative thing. I actually see this as a positive thing in this case, because normally in games the thickness of plates is ridiculously thick, like to a point that it would actually be unhuman and would not be able to be worn. Because historical plate, although it's true that the gauge or the millimeters varied, the thickness varied, we are always talking about between 1 millimeter to 3 millimeters max, although there are situations where we get even up to 4, 5 and 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters. There are situations like this, but they're very, very specific, special situations, and we're never really talking about the entire measurement for the armor, because the concept is, with real historical armor, that thickness would vary depending on what portion of the plate we're talking about. And something similar would happen with the cuirass, so having the front thicker and the sides being thinner. So you would have more mass in the parts that were more exposed. But with video games, often we see these armors that are ridiculously thick, like 5 centimeters thick. Now, what that would mean is two things. First of all, it would probably weigh somewhere around 150 kilos or something that no one could really realistically wear. And secondly, you don't actually need that much thickness for the armor to function. Now, moving on to the helmet, it's clearly an armet. Maximilian helmets wear armets, so closed helmets with visors. In order to be 100% a Maximilian helmet, though, this helmet would have had to have more fluting. As a matter of fact, there isn't much fluting in this helmet. There is a little bit, but not as much as the cuirass and the Pauldrons. Now, talking about the gloves, we have the right glove with no protection, it's only leather, and the left glove being metal. Now, this is something, asymmetry. We also have asymmetry with Pauldrons, actually, in this armor. Asymmetry existed, but it's more of a Northern Italian technique. So this kind of changes things a little bit. So what kind of Gothic armor is this? Perhaps it would be a Gothic armor alla tedesca, so made from Italians but in German style. That could make sense, because of the asymmetric Pauldrons, which didn't really happen much in the German style. But although the asymmetry existed, I've never really seen a suit of armor with the right arm completely unprotected by plates. Now, what the game calls leggings here, I'm not very happy with the leggings, I have to say. I like all the rest of the armor, but the leggings, what the game calls leggings, so basically we are talking about cuisse and all the way down to the greaves. which are actually missing in this case. So this is a little strange because, again, it did happen, but not much in the Gothic style. So sometimes Italians we didn't wear sabatons, other times we did. In this case, it kind of looks strange to have such an armor with no greaves at all. Also, because it would have been interesting to see the greaves, because the greaves would be the only part of Gothic armor that was not fluted and had no fluting. So that would have been interesting to see if they would have done that, but we'll never know. Alright, Elite Knight Set. Here is where things start getting a little confusing in the game, because it's a good set, it's good looking, I've had it for a while. I actually prefer the helmet. What I do is that I wear the Knight set with the Elite Knight helmet because I like having the visor closed. But here things get a little confusing because this is the Elite Knight set, so this is supposed to be better than the Knight set. However, well, the helmet is exactly the same, but the torso protection is completely different. I mean, we have the same Pauldrons, but then he's simply wearing mail armor. Now, giving for granted that this is riveted mail, considering a historical accuracy, riveted mail is an excellent form of protection, but we sort of went back in time, so to speak, because it is true that mail armor continued to be worn even in the 15th century, but it was something that you would put underneath your main armor, which was plate armor. So in a world where full 16th century Gothic style armor has been invented, it wouldn't really make sense to wear mail armor alone, particularly for a higher ranking knight. The arms are very similar to the other armor, so I won't talk about these much. Also, another thing is that he's wearing some form of tabard on top of the mail armor. And again, this is something that was done up to the 12th century, 13th century. Already in the 14th century, we kind of start losing the concept of tabards, and the tabard completely disappears in the 15th century, because this is when the so-called armatura bianca, la bianca armatura, so the white armor, including white Italian armor, but also Gothic armor was considered to be white armor, began to be used and was the new fashion. And white armor means plain steel with nothing on top of it. So again, here we kind of went back in time. Now, for the legs, we see there is an improvement here, because at least we've got greaves, and they are just standard closed greaves. They could be English, they could be Italian, they can be anything really, they can be Gothic as well, because again, as I said before, they wouldn't be fluted, and as a matter of fact they are not. So I think our question has been answered. Iron and Sunset. This is again another situation we have a nice great helm there, and that already, I appreciate grey helms and I like wearing them in video games, so this is another set that I like, and the whole concept of the sun and everything is interesting. We've got a surcoat and everything, but this set again, it's a kind of a strange situation. I understand there are different countries that involved with their own styles, etc. But one thing that happened in Europe is that, yes, Europe had many countries, but when one started developing, for example, plate armor, all the others did as well, because not upgrading your techniques would mean utter annihilation. So again, this kind of knight here looks an 11th century knight. We're talking about the context of the Crusades, I would assume. We see a complete mail armor, which including legs and arms, so yes, but I see nothing that would make the set stand out as a 12th century set, so I would say it's a very, very standard 11th century set with a surcoat on top. Also, if you notice, the helmet has a flat top, which means that this is not the earliest example of great helm, because it's entirely closed, but the sugarloaf technique still hasn't been applied. As a matter of fact, these kind of helmets were used in Europe for around 100 years, and then they were replaced by great helms with sugarloaf. Very strange, though, the fact that he has no hand protection. Now, hands are not to be underestimated. He only has got iron bracelets, the game tells us, so it seems like the whole armor was made of iron. And hands can be an easy target to hit during battle, so this would not make sense at all unless you're talking about an archer. The Silver Knight set. Pretty good looking set, but let's evaluate it. what does it look like? Well, at first glance, although very evil looking, I can say that the helmet is definitely a barbute. These kind of helmets were used historically, and we should not be deceived by the fact that it's an actual simpler helmet because it has no visor. These kind of helmets were used in the northern Italian style, Milanese style of armor, because we have to consider the Milanese armors had several kinds of helmets. So the most popular would be an armet, but still this was a fashion that was used even up to the 15th century. So the fact that the full plate armor here has a barbute is not a problem from a historical point of view. Even Gothic armors had several kinds of helmets, most of the times the armet or the salet. The armor itself looks very complex. The pauldrons for a historical armor would be a bit too big. So that is, which is something that actually happens a lot in video games. But considering it's fantasy, of course, it's absolutely no problem. But apart from that, I really like the fact that the armor sharpens at the waist. That is correct and is historically accurate. As a matter of fact, that is one of the most erroneously portrayed and represented parts of armor. Now, the cannons, or gauntlets, like the game calls them, are very interesting, articulated fingers. For the lower part of the armor, I see no problems, good sabatons, good greaves, actually well shaped, and we can easily see that he has got a mail shirt underneath all that, because we have to consider that it is true that with development of full plate armor, quite a lot of people stopped wearing the full shirt of mail underneath and changed it into an alarming doublet with mail only in the important places. But for example, in Italy, this fashion of wearing a full shirt of mail continued on until the 15th century. As a matter of fact, sometimes Italian knights even wore 2 shirts of mail under plate armor. So this would be absolutely fine. It happened in history, it would probably happen here. The steel set. Now, the armor looks quite bulky, but the fact that again it's thin at the waist makes it reasonable. The pauldrons again tend to be a bit too big, and the area that makes things a little complicated is the kind of gorget that we have here. Very high, looks good. As far as I'm concerned, would most likely be a tournament armor rather than a battlefield armor. As a matter of fact, there were quite a few jousting armors which normally weighted twice as much as battlefield armors, which had some systems of frogmouth helmets that did not even allow the wearer to turn his head, because you didn't need to. You just need to go forward and hit the opponent with a lance in order to increase protection over mobility. Now, for the steel helmet set, I'd say that it doesn't actually look much medieval. To me, it looks more like a Greek Illyrian helmet, with the addition of a visor, which makes it look similar a little bit to the Praetorian helmet from the Romans. So again, it's a little bit of a mix. That's what I see, at least. Moving on to the warrior set. I'm not very happy with the warrior set. As a matter of fact, well, I always choose knights anyways, but I wouldn't have chosen the warrior for the set that it starts with, because first of all, it tells us it's a hardened leather set. The helmet and the pauldrons are made of iron, and also the greaves. So for the greaves, it actually is better than the knight set. But hardened leather. Well, hardened leather was used historically by some cultures, particularly very Eastern cultures, most of the times. But in Europe, leather was mostly used as a complementary for example, straps and used for fastening, etc. So leather being the main kind of protection and armor. Well, I'm not really sure about that. Just wear mail armor. Honestly, I don't think that that's going to make much of a difference. You could wear just mail armor and a gambler's, and that would make a much better warrior. Also, if you look at the pauldrons, they are asymmetric, but the asymmetry is wrong, because asymmetric pauldrons, which are again a northern Italian style, only make sense when the bigger pauldron is the left one, because unless you are talking about a left-handed knight, the right pauldron is the smaller one, because that's the arm that you use for attacking, so it needs to be more nimble, hence the smaller size. But your line of defense is your left side of the body, where you either use the shield or you just keep forward because of your fighting position, and that's why the left pauldron needs to be bigger. So asymmetry only makes sense when it's done properly. This kind of asymmetry here would only be fashion. The game tells us that the helmet is just a sturdy standard iron helmet. Fair enough, it's quite simple. It's quite a simple helmet. It looks somewhat like an Italian sallet, I would say, considering the Italian sallets were more rounded. It did not have long tails like the German ones. The arms, again, basically have no protection. He only has got a pair of gloves, and as you know, I'm not very happy with that. The Holy Set. Here I have a few more issues again. The set looks quite bulky, particularly the tassets, and also the cuirass here. You can see clearly that it's going just straight down. There is no reduction at the waist, no sharpening, so this would be very, very heavy to carry. And also, if this gentleman here were to lean forward, his lower part of the chest plate would most likely be blocked, considering that it's too long, far down as far as I can see. It doesn't stop at a natural waist, and so most likely that would bring up the whole chest plate, choking him to death or perhaps breaking his neck. Apart from that, it's a bit of a mix because we've got a clearly Norman style nasal helmet together with a male coif, or coif if you want, which is a 10th century form of protection, early 11th century form of protection, used with a chest plate which is clearly 14th century for what I can guess. So it's a bit of a mismatching, it's anachronistic. So I'm not really in favor of the Holy Set. Hollow Soldier Set. Now, I understand, and I would like to say before starting the actual evaluation here, I understand that we're talking about an undead warrior, so you're just picking up remains from an undead body, hence the fact that the armor is completely in pieces, and whatever, if you've just started and you're a warrior but you don't have much and you just find that and it kind of fits you, and you put it on, it's better than nothing. I understand that for the top, but not for the bottom. Because if you look at the Greaves, or what remains of them, it makes no sense. Like, why wearing them in the first place? It makes absolutely no sense to wear those kind of remainings of Greaves. It's only the leather and even a little bit, not much left of the strings attaching what used to be the plate of the Greve. So again, I understand wearing it, perhaps a small piece of cuirass or a small piece of breastplate, although I have to say that would be hanging entirely on the shoulders. For a poor warrior, I understand, no problem. But apart from that, the set doesn't really make much sense. The helmet is very similar to that of the warrior set, so no need to evaluate that. Moving to the Hollow Warrior set, it looks like what remains of a male armor or male shirt, although now it has become a kind of a male top, shall we say. And there is some form of leather jacket, I believe. I'm not sure if that's a coat of plates, but from the colour I would say it's either a rusted coat of plates or a leather jacket. Now, so it's very similar to the Hollow set, but it's just pieces from male armour. I have the same complaints here for the Greve, the right Greve. Makes no sense to even wear that piece. You might as well just wear a pair of boots. Havel set, or Havel set, not sure how to pronounce it. Now, this is clearly getting more and more fantasy, and it's getting more and more bulky. You see, when I was talking about the thickness of the plates at first, this is exactly what I mean. I mean, look at these plates. They look, what, 10 centimeters thick? Now, this whole armor would probably weigh, I don't know, 200 kilos, something like that. And so this is not wearable for a human being. For an undead, no problem, I suppose. But I imagine there's some form of black magic moving them anyways, considering that they're, skeletons move and they have no muscles, so no problem there. But for a human, this would make absolutely no sense. The helmet resembles a frog mouth, which is my favorite helmet, so it looks good, but it's a little bit too open. It has too many openings. Again, a frog mouth is a tournament helmet, so it's not a helmet where you have a lot of openings. It's not a helmet where you have to even conceive and bother much about ventilation, because you're just wearing it for the impact and then you remove it after your turn in the tournament. And the whole concept of the frog mouth is the front protection of this solid plate, which here is gone in order to have visibility and ventilation. So in this case, although it looks good, I like this helmet quite a bit, but then I would have just gone, if you really want ventilation, then you need to choose either a bassinet or any other helmet which has an open a visor that can be hinged up. So the first 10 sets that I wanted to evaluate in this part 1 video. If you have made it so far in the video, well, I have to commend you. You must be a real hardcore fan of the series, or someone who simply loves a lot medieval armors and evaluations. In part 2, I will evaluate 10 more sets. In part 3, I will evaluate 10 more sets. And if the series goes well, I'll also go through Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Demon Souls, anything you want. Now, if you like this video and you like Dark Souls, please give us a like, comment and subscribe. Also, let me know which of these 10 sets that have been presented here today would be your favorite. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye, and keep having fun.